I didn't want to go. Honestly, when the message from my brother came just one short line, "Dad died, funeral on Saturday," I didn't cry, I didn't panic. There was only a dull, frozen block lodged somewhere under my ribcage. I stared at the screen like it was someone else's life, as if it wasn't my father, not my family. I even thought, maybe just ignore it. Turn off my phone. Say I was traveling. After all, I hadn't seen my parents since I left home. What was it, 15 years ago? I was 21 then. I had just moved to Portland, just started hormone therapy, just allowed myself to say, she, without feeling like I was disturbing someone's peace. My father took it as betrayal. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. He just said, "You're no longer my son," and walked out of the room. Since then, no letters. No calls. My mom would write sometimes at Christmas, something formal, cautious. "Hope you're well, stay safe." But my father? He was silence. And yet, I bought a ticket to Bozeman, Montana. United evening flight, connection in Denver. All I brought was a suitcase, a makeup bag, and a wig. Not the one I wore on stage, a real one, with soft chestnut waves and a part where the scalp looked almost real. I sat at the airport, in Starbucks, holding a too-hot latte, rehearsing in my head all the things I might say if someone asked, "Alex, is that you?" No, I'd want to answer, "Alexis, has been for a long time." Sometimes it feels like I've been living all this time in another country. I have a job. My clothing design studio in Portland brings in steady income. I have friends, game nights, a favorite armchair, and a neighbor, a Chinese woman named Lily, who brings me noodles when I'm too tired to cook. My life is real. Not perfect, but real. And still, this trip feels like a teleportation back into someone else's past, where my name sounded different, where I hid even from the mirror. I couldn't figure out why I was flying. Not for closure that happened years ago. Not for family they lost me long before I ever left. I nearly canceled everything at the last moment, shut the laptop, stayed home. But then I remembered. Dad used to say, "Family is blood, everything else is a choice." I stayed silent back then. But now I'm flying there to prove. No, Dad, family is not blood. Family is the people who acknowledge you as alive. The ones who don't choose silence. The ones who can look you in the eyes and see who you are. And you couldn't, Ed. I didn't want to go. But maybe, sometimes the way home isn't a return. It's a declaration. That you exist, no matter what. And if they see me in a dress, with short nails, in a soft wig, wearing the name they never said out loud, they'll understand. I'm here. And I didn't give up. I didn't remember Montana being this blindingly bright. In the sunlight, the hills looked washed clean, almost painfully pure, and still, as the train began to slow before the stop in Tigerwood, I felt my body tense like the air had thickened. Tigerwood. A town frozen somewhere between 10 a.m. church service and the August barbecue championship. Everything was familiar here. The "God Bless Our Troops" sign at the gas station, Mabel's bakery with the best rhubarb pie in the county. And of course the white church tower where I used to sing in the choir every Sunday with a voice that no longer sounds the same. I was 36. I returned to the town I left 15 years ago as Alex. And now as Alexis. There were only 6 people in the train car. An elderly couple wearing "Make America Great Again" hats, a student with pink headphones, and me, a woman piecing herself back together. In the train's women's restroom, tiny, metallic, and smelling of antiseptic, I opened my makeup bag. Powder, a bit of blush, a touch of eyeliner. And the wig, the one I hid in my closet, throughout chemotherapy. It still smelled like conditioner and fear, but now also like resilience. I pulled it on slowly, like a helmet before battle. Ran my fingers along the part, secured it with clips. Inside, everything trembled, but on the outside, calm. I looked at my reflection in the fogged-up mirror. No theater, no mask. I'm not playing a role. I am who I am, even if they think otherwise. When the train stopped and I stepped onto the platform, the asphalt under my feet felt just like it did in my childhood. My brother was waiting nearby Dan, Older, his back straight just like Dad's. He didn't approach, just stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze trying to calculate, is it really her? Hey, I said. He nodded, didn't move closer, but he didn't turn away either. We walked in silence to his pickup. The music playing softly, something country, as always. He didn't ask about the trip. I didn't ask who else would be there. He drove me home. To that same house on Halo Street, where I once hid in the closet with the first dress I ever made sewn from an old curtain. Where I overheard our father tell Mom, "Our son is sick, this needs to be burned out of him." Now I was returning not as a son, not as a victim, but as someone who survived, who, even after illness and exile, remained herself. I rested my hand on the armrest. My fingers were trembling. But in my heart, there was no regret. St. Paul's Church was just as I remembered it. White walls, stained glass windows with grapevines, wooden pews polished to a shine by generations of backs. And yet, on this day, it felt like the walls had grown lower, the air heavier, and the stairs sharper. When I walked in, people turned almost in unison, as if someone had muted the room. Silence. Not reverent. Paralyzing. I could feel the wave of gazes ripple from the door to the altar, as if I were not a person, but a ghost. To my left, someone whispered, "Is that Alex?" From the right, a little louder, "Is that her?" My heels clicked against the wooden floor. I walked, trying to breathe evenly. The dress was black, modest, ankle length, hair neatly styled. Everything on me was calm except my heart. My mother sat in the second row. Gray suit, pearl earrings she only wore for special occasions. She turned her head toward me and instantly looked away, as if she'd seen not a daughter, but a disgrace, a stain, a void. Dan, my brother, sat beside her. Shoulders tight, breathing hard. Hands clenched on his lap as if it wasn't words, but his body holding him back. The priest, Father Thomas, the same one who once taught us to forgive as God forgives, stumbled over his text when I walked past. He coughed, glanced at someone in the crowd, tripped on the word sons, and quickly corrected himself. And children. I sat in the last row, calmly, without defiance. I didn't need to be in the center. I just wanted to be present, as I am. Aunt Jane sat in front of me. She turned, met my eyes, pressed her lips together, and maybe nodded. Her gaze wasn't hostile, just lost. Like someone who heard an old song in a new arrangement and didn't know whether to feel grateful or uneasy. The ceremony went on. Familiar words. A loving father, a respected man, a man of honor. Some cried, some nodded. I sat quietly, hands resting on my knees, shoulders straight. In my mind, not a prayer, but memory. How he once fixed the fence and laughed at my fear of cows. How we roasted marshmallows in the backyard. How, the day I told him who I truly was, he didn't yell, didn't hit, didn't insult. He simply walked out, closed the door behind him, and never opened it again. I was a stranger in my own family, I thought. But I've never regretted it, because I was myself. Not convenient, not safe, not a sanitized version. Myself. And in that moment, among the stares, the whispers, the quiet judgment, I suddenly realized. I didn't come here to be accepted. I came because I could. Because I'm alive. After the funeral, as tradition went in Tigerwood, everyone headed to my mother's house, a 2-story home with a grapevine-wrapped porch where nothing had changed since 1974, except maybe the curtain colors. Tables were already set, grilled burgers, potato salad, Mrs. Hendrix's cherry pie, and cheese platters from the local Walmart. Someone brought homemade lemonade, someone else the good old whiskey. And, of course, the conversations. The kind where everyone talks quietly, but just loud enough for you to hear. I stood by the bookshelf, pretending to read the spines while hearing, "Did you see who came, Alex? Or what now? They say he moved to California. Portland? Same thing. Really, you know what I mean." She's brave, I guess. I couldn't do that. That I couldn't do that struck me. As if I'd jumped out of a plane without permission. As if living in your own skin were some kind of stunt. One of my cousins came over with a paper cup of lemonade. His smile polite, stretched. His voice a bit louder than usual to sound supportive. You look good, Alexis. I nodded. Thanks. Must be hard being here. After everything. Another nod. Well, you're brave. I just couldn't, I finished for him. He chuckled awkwardly and walked away, pretending to look for a plate. I walked into the living room. Photos hung on the walls neatly framed. Dad in his Air Force uniform. Mom by the piano. Dan with his baseball trophy. Godparents. Cousins. Graduations. Someone's wedding. Someone's fishing trip. But not a single picture of me. Not even from when I was still convenient. No Halloween. No Yellowstone trip. No school concert. I hadn't been erased after transitioning. I had been erased as an idea. A disruption too big for their picture of wholesomeness. I walked over to the sideboard. There were framed portraits of Dad over the years. One of them had his favorite phrase engraved in the glass. Raise 'em right, ride 'em straight, pray every night. Beneath it sat his old cowboy hat, the one he wore until his back started giving out. I remembered how he used to call me my little man when we fixed gates or stacked firewood. And how one day I was 16 he found my journal. It had sketches of dresses, thoughts about a body that didn't feel like mine. He didn't yell. He just walked to the backyard, tossed the journal into the burn barrel, and lit a match. I stood by the window, watching the words written out of fear disappear into the fire's skin. Want some pie? Came Aunt Jane's voice. I startled. She stood beside me in an apron with sunflowers on it. It turned out too sweet, as always. I took a slice. Not out of politeness, out of gratitude. Because in her eyes there was no judgment, only caution. And maybe something like regret. I stepped onto the porch to breathe. Sunlight fell on the lawn where we used to play cricket. My nieces and nephews laughed in the distance. Everything around me felt frozen in an old film from which my character had been cut. But I was still here, sitting on a wooden bench, sipping warm lemonade. And I knew, yes, I was a stranger within these walls. But not a stranger to myself. The law office was in downtown Tigerwood, in a red brick building between the pharmacy and the fishing supply store. I sat in the corner, by the window. The room smelled of dust, coffee, and old wood. A faded reproduction of the American flag hung on the wall, bleached by years of sun. Everyone was already there. Dan, my brother in a navy blazer, sat with his fingers locked so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Travis, the youngest, with an earring and a leather bracelet that always felt a little too much for Tigerwood, bounced his leg impatiently. Mom composed in gray, as if mourning was still officially ongoing, though the funeral had been a week ago. And me in a black blouse and a warm coffee-colored skirt, wearing that wig perfectly styled like armor. Mr. Harris entered our father's lawyer since the 90s. Balding, with a perpetually drooping tie knot, he looked like a man long tired of family drama but well paid to tolerate it. He sat, laid out the papers, looked up. As you know, Mr. Roy Ryan passed away 3 weeks ago. This is a certified will, drafted 9 months ago. Signature verified by notary and witness. I'll begin with the main section. My brother straightened. My mother lifted her chin slightly. I stayed in the shadow. I expected nothing. I, Roy William Ryan, being of sound mind and body, do bequeath the following. The farm 72 acres, equipment, grain elevators, pastures. 2 trucks, a tractor, the house. Wells Fargo accounts and an investment portfolio. Everyone was waiting for names. My brothers, no doubt, already dividing plots in their heads who'd get the northern slopes, who'd manage the mill. Harris paused, then read, all land, equipment, investments, and accounts I leave to... Pause. Silence. Alexis Ryan, my daughter. The silence in the room was so sharp, I heard someone drop a plastic cup of water. It hit the carpet and rolled slowly, like in a movie. What the hell? Dan shouted, leaping to his feet, his voice cracking into falsetto. Travis stared at me like I had just shapeshifted into an alien. Mom didn't move, only her lips tightened into a chalk-white line. He couldn't. This is a mistake. Dan lunged toward the table, looming over the lawyer. Harris didn't flinch. That's your father's signature. The will is valid. If you choose to contest, the process will be long, and I assure you there is video confirmation as well. I didn't say a word. I just sat and breathed. For the first time during this entire trip, I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't know why he changed the will. Why, after years of silence, a burned diary erased photos, he chose to call me his daughter. But he did. Not in a letter. Not in a phone call. But in a legal document, something you can't just erase. Mom stood. Slowly. Her hands were shaking. This is betrayal, she said. He knew what he was doing, I replied calmly. He knew, that's why he didn't say a word to you. Dan turned away. Travis muttered something under his breath like a prayer or a curse. And I sat. And for the first time in my life, I felt it. I wasn't a disgrace. I was recognition. Maybe the final one, maybe posthumous. But real. After the will was read, once everyone had already left some cursing, some with eyes cast down, Mr. Harris gestured for me to stay. He closed the folder, removed his glasses, and pulled an envelope from the bottom drawer. Thick paper, slightly yellowed edges. On the front, in handwriting I knew by heart. For her, only if she comes in person. He left this 6 months ago, Harris said. Said that if you ever came back, you should read it. I nodded. My heart was pounding like it used to before a school exam, but the stakes were different. This wasn't a test of knowledge. It was a test of the wound. Had it healed? I left the office, but didn't go far. I walked across the street to the diner, the same one where my dad and I used to have pancakes on Sundays after church. I sat by the window, ordered only tea. And honey. The envelope felt heavy. Not by weight, by meaning. I opened it carefully. My fingers were trembling. Inside a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was uneven, large. Some of the ink had faded. Alexis. If you're reading this, it means you came. Which means you're still the same stubborn, strong, impossible person, just like I remember you. I didn't know how to talk to you. I never learned. Maybe I didn't try. It was easier to stay silent than to say the wrong thing. But I was watching. I read your interview in The Atlantic. I saw your TEDx talk in Portland. I recognized your voice. It had changed, but it was strong. Sometimes I found your essays the ones under a pen name about what it's like to feel like a stranger in your own family. About living without a father's shadow. I knew they were yours. And I was ashamed. Not of you. Of myself. I stopped. For the first time in a long while, my hands were shaking not from anger but from pain that had nowhere to go. I returned to the letter. I never had the courage to be myself. My father beat me if I cried. My drill sergeant if I wasn't man enough. I raised you to be a boy because I was afraid you wouldn't survive otherwise. But you didn't choose survival. You chose life. On your terms. Alongside pain. Through loneliness. And I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I never said it when I was alive. I'm sorry I only understood it at the end. Your father, Roy Ryan. I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, as if the words hadn't pierced the skin yet, only brushed against it. It didn't undo the past. Didn't unburn the diary. Didn't restore the photographs to the wall. But it was truth. Late. Quiet. But real. A country song began to play in the diner, the kind my dad used to listen to in his old Chevy. Through the window, I saw flags swaying and school kids walking down the sidewalk loud, alive, the way we once were. I stepped outside. The letter in my bag. Peace in my chest. He hadn't understood me in life. But he had seen me. And he had acknowledged me. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. That evening, I found myself once again in the house where I grew up. The same front step with its familiar creak. The same tar-tangent patterned wallpaper in the living room. The same scent of old wood, coffee, and now, anger. My brothers were already waiting inside. Travis sat on the arm of the couch, rocking forward and back like he was prepping for a fight. Dan leaned against the mantel, his face a blend of hurt, rage, and something almost pitiful. My mother stood by the window, in the same gray blouse she'd worn to the funeral. She said nothing, just stared into the night. "You manipulated him," Dan said, his voice steady, like a prosecutor's. "You showed up after 20 years and convinced the old man you deserved everything?" "He was old," Travis added. "You could have made him believe anything. He wasn't himself." I looked at them calmly, without defense. Because I knew this wasn't about the will. This was about the shattering of their worldview. He was in his right mind when he gave you land, trucks, money, but he suddenly lost it when he gave something to me. Dan stepped closer. "You weren't here, Alex. You didn't work that land. You didn't feed the cattle. You were in LA, Portland, wherever the hell you were." I didn't back down. "I was working a different kind of land, Dan. Inside. While you were building barns, I was trying to survive in a body I couldn't live in. While you were managing a farm, I was learning how to live without a father who burned my diary and my name." Travis scoffed. "Oh, come on. The speeches again. You think that gives you the right to everything?" I inhaled, then said, clearly, "Number. But it gives me the right to exist, to be part of this family, this story, this name." He understood that even if it came late. My mother finally turned. No tears in her eyes, no forgiveness, only stone. And a silence louder than shouting. She didn't say a word, but everything in her stare screamed, "You're not mine. You're not one of us." I nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "I'm leaving." I walked to the hallway where my photo had never hung. Past the kitchen where I once dreamed of cooking with my mother. Past the staircase I once jumped from with a backpack, pretending to be a superhero before I learned that heroes like me didn't exist in this family. I opened the door. Cold air hit my face like a slap, but it didn't hurt. I walked out, not broken, not defeated, but free. In the car, I sat with the window down, listened to crickets interrupt the silence, and thought, I didn't win. This wasn't victory. It was balance. I hadn't stolen. I hadn't tricked. I had simply finally received what had always been mine by right. The right to be part of the story. The right to be a daughter. The right to simply be. The next morning, I drove to the farm alone. No relatives, no lawyers. Just me, an old pickup truck, a dusty road, and a field stretching all the way to the horizon, as if deliberately reminding me, this is all yours now. The sun hadn't risen high yet. The air smelled of hay, damp soil, and something childlike, the kind of scent that only exists in memory. I walked past the barns, through the main gates, and stopped at the old red shed. It stood, just as always, on the eastern side of the property, red, with peeling paint, its door creaking like it remembered me. When I opened it, my heart skipped. The same workbenches. The same tools hanging on the wall. Even the bucket of nails was right where I remembered it. This was our place. Right here, many years ago, my father and I had built horse feeders together. He used to say, "A hammer's no tool for a girl. But for you, Lex, I'll allow it." Back then, I smiled, not knowing that just a few years later, Lex would become a banned word in this house. I circled the shed, ran my fingers along a dusty shelf, and suddenly saw a box. Old cardboard. On the lid, written in thick marker, "Lex, don't toss." I sat on the floor, my knees cracked. Inside dust, paper, and history. On top was a photo I was about 8, in overalls, boots, grinning wide, holding a can of paint. On the back, in my father's handwriting, "Helper of the Month, Summer '97. Beneath it, drawings. Horses, a house, 2 figures, one tall, wearing a cowboy hat, the other with long hair and a dress. I remembered drawing it, dreaming to be like that. My father had said, stick to animals. But he kept the drawing. And then I saw it. Folded neatly, barely touched by time, the first dress I ever sewed. Yellow. Uneven stitches. Buttons sewn crooked. I was 13. I used to hide it in my closet, afraid he'd burn something again. But he hadn't. He kept it. All of it. I sat on the floor of that old barn, surrounded by my childhood dreams, my hurt, my quiet victory, and his silent, shame-tinged, but real recognition. He didn't know how to speak, but he knew how to keep things. And maybe he understood more than he ever showed. I picked up one of the photographs, the one where we were together, both in work gloves, covered in dust and joy. In it, he looked at me the way I'd always wished. Not like a son. Just like a beloved child. I wiped the dust from the frame. And I knew. This is my barn now. My farm. My memory. Not to rewrite his story, but to finally complete it with mine. It started with a message from the editor of a small independent blog in Austin. She found me after I left a comment on an article about inheritance rights in LGBTQ+ families brief, to the point, but, as she wrote, with a voice you don't forget. We spoke on the phone. She asked, "Did you really inherit a farm from your father, after being cast out by your family?" I replied, "Not cast out, just erased." And then they didn't rewrite me in time. A week later, the interview was published. How my father's funeral gave me back my voice. The piece spread quickly on social media. It wasn't angry, it wasn't vengeful, just honest. About the farm, about the will, about the letter, about how silence can be harsher than rejection, but sometimes it's silence that holds hidden love. People commented, "You said what I've been afraid to tell my mother my whole life. I left too, just to survive. Thank you for giving me hope. Now I know you can return, not back, but to yourself." I read each message like I was learning to breathe again. And then I saw a name in my inbox. Dan Ryan. My brother. My heart turned in a strange, quiet way. The message was short. "I'm still angry. Not at you. At everything. At him. At myself. But I read what you wrote and I'm starting to understand. I'm not promising anything. But thank you for not giving up." I read it 3 times. Maybe he still wouldn't accept me. But those words held the most important thing: honesty. Not reconciliation, but a bridge. Then another message came. An email. From an address I knew by heart. My mother. Subject. No subject. Message. "You were brave. Like your father." Sometimes I think that's what scared us most. Laura, the neighbor, sent me the link to your interview. I read it. All of it. I don't know what comes next, but I know that who you are is not a shame. It's courage. I closed the laptop. The room was quiet. Outside, the sky was turning gold, that long, orange, golden kind of sunset you only see in Montana. The kind that used to hang above us while Dad and I put the tools away. I didn't know where this would lead. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I didn't dream of family dinners. But I knew one thing. My voice wasn't lost. It had just been silenced by others, by fear, by shame. And now it was speaking. And someone was listening. Even those I had long stopped hoping would hear. It had been a few months since the day I first stepped into the barn and found that box, my past life, carefully packed and preserved. Now I was here not as a guest or a ghost, but as the owner. Not to run from the past, but to build my future. The ranch gates no longer looked old and forgotten. They now held a new sign, forged by the local blacksmith in Tigerwood. Lex Ryan Ranch. My name, my legacy, my story. The first time I saw it, my heart tightened. It wasn't just letters in metal. It was recognition. Recognition of me. I sat on the porch of the house, the same one I grew up in, but now filled with my music, my silence. In my hands, a mug of freshly brewed coffee from my favorite shop in Bozeman. The wind played with the short strands of my hair. I wasn't wearing a wig today. That was my choice. Not to hide, but to show I'm here. I'm real. With my scars, my story, my light. I smiled quietly, calmly, genuinely. Because now I knew. Home isn't walls and a roof. Home is the place where you are accepted. Where you accept yourself. Where the past and future meet and become your strength. I took a sip, closed my eyes for a moment, felt the sun on my face, and heard a cricket singing somewhere beyond the hills. The same sound that once greeted me in Tigerwood. Now my home is here, and I'm ready for what's next.